Hello, welcome to another edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace, reporting from Birdland here in New York City. Blessing the band stage this weekend is a young lion who really epitomizes what the language of this music called jazz is all about, both on the band stage as well as in the classrooms. Benny Green played and recorded with some of the most important and pivotal jazz icons of the day, ranging from the great Oscar Peterson to Betty Carter, as well as Art Blakey, just to name an endless few. Tonight I had a chance to break bread with him for a few minutes to reflect on the Young Lions movement of jazz during the 1980s and how it impacted him as a musician. Also, we sit down and we talked about how he's really taking the education and the language of this music and imparting it on the students at the University of Michigan, where he's a professor, as well as we sit down and we talk about some of the most important parts of this music, which he loves, called jazz. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the sounds of Mr. Benny Green and his trio live here at Birdland as part of the Pace Report here in New York City. I have been a big fan of yours for a very long time. I'm just honored to sit down here to break bread with you. Welcome back to New York. And I want to talk to you about a lot of things. In New York, you came here as the Young Lions was really taking off and resurging this music. And speaking now, you know, some 25, almost 30 years later, sitting now, how do you feel about musically where you are right now?
Well, I think one thing that hopefully comes with time and life experience is we have a clear and hopefully more kind of grounded sense of who we are, less questioning who we are on a seasonal basis, you know, based on environmental factors, but we see ourselves in a variety of contexts over the years and learn about ourselves through our relationships with others, musically speaking and personally, So one thing that I can say at this age or stage of life musically is I know who I am. You know, there's no sort of identity crisis as to how I want to play the music that I love. And as the years go on, more and more I embrace the very people that inspired me to play. You know, Thelonious Monk, McCoy Tyner, Cedar Walton, you know, on and on, you know, Hank Jones, Tommy Flanagan, Wynton Kelly, Red Garland, Nat Cole, Art Tatum, Oscar Peterson, you know, on and on. Horace Silver, Sonny Clark, you know, and I can listen to them and understand how much they fuel what I do, their nourishment for anything having to do with my own sound. My own sound is me wanting to be authentic, to play with an authentic jazz feeling. I've never really aspired to be an innovator, try to find something that's different per se, but I want to just honestly reflect the music that I love, which I now have, for the most part, largely via records. You know, some of the people I mentioned aren't here in the flesh right now, and that was, you know, short list. But you know, say good couple dozen pianists. I try to get everything I can by any recording they ever made, not just certain hit recordings, but I try to listen to the whole sweep of their recording career, you know, how they began, how they evolved, because we artists, and we're always in the learning process. There's no end to what we can learn humanly from listening to their records and hearing how they evolved, you know, or in some cases peaked, or like if you want to listen to someone I mentioned, Sonny Clark, his entire recording career is 10 years. 10 years. And you're talking about the records most of us would hear of Sonny Clark, the Blue Note records. Those are about 5.5, 6 years, 1957 to 62. I think he died 63. And within those years, he was like about 27 when he died, you know. But there's really, for me, and many others who love this music, there's no limit to what I can receive as inspiration from listening to him, because more and more, as I get older, I listen for the little things, the subtle things that somehow cause the music to feel magical. And more I realize that it has to do with the interaction between the musicians, not just what licks or what voicings someone played, but why they played them conversationally in conjunction with the other musicians. I didn't really hear or listen or maybe even play that way when I was younger. So in terms of your question about how playing is for me these days, I know that I'm on a path. Of course, you know, when you're on a serious path as an artist, the more you live and experience, the more you realize that you do not know. Right? But I know that I love this music, and I know that the masters, you know, that have helped me, Ray Brown, Betty Carter, Art Blakey, Freddie Hubbard, Oscar Peterson, they all emphasized certain core elements that still allow the music to continually expand, be personalized, and those things are swinging, playing the blues, yeah, taking chances, and they exhibit things that you can't put in books, like sense of humor, quotes, a graceful sense of bravura with balance. All these things that we humanly learn. So if I listen to a Tommy Flanagan record, I get a whole attitude adjustment humanly from the way he plays, because you sense, even without being a musician, that he's a master, and you feel the restraint and the choices that he makes, and it gives you some kind of insight into his very character. So it doesn't make any sense. This is the way I hear music when I listen to my favorite records that I've listened to for decades now, and hopefully somehow that gets reflected in my playing. I know my appreciation for the musicians who I play with, who are on the bandstand with me, is much changed over the years in that rather than ever approaching them, although I didn't consciously realize I was at the time, like they were a play-along track. You know, I could play my stuff while they keep time. I now very much, you know, I have an idea, and then everything, once the idea is put forth, where it goes is very much in response to what the musicians I'm playing with are doing, because we're sharing the time feel. Whatever swing is, it can't be defined in words. It's co-created. You know, there's a rub. You know, no one's being a metronome when things swing. Right. It's how we interpret the time, right? And so I now dig, when I listen to records I love, you know, if I listen to the rhythm section playing on the John Coltrane album Blue Train, you know, Kenny Drew and Paul Chambers and Philly Joe Jones, who, by the way, made many records together as a rhythm section, you know, Dexter Collin, many records. I'm digging how they swing together, the way the three of them interpret the time, and what it does for the beat, you know, how it sets up the soloist. So I didn't listen or hear or notice in that way when I was younger, so I probably in some sense didn't play in that way. But other than that, I've always been the same person that was influenced by the people I mentioned to you now, and I've never really changed horses that way. I love them, and I have no conflict about wanting to be able to play more in their authentic ways. I didn't want to say style. But so somehow my sound is a reflection of all that. If that makes any sense.
Benny, every jazz musician, whether you're a pianist, a bassist, a drummer, somehow, some way, you're going to have to play with a quintet, quartet, or a trio. but you're also going to have to be behind a vocalist.
That's right.
And, Betty Carter, one of the things that was very unique about her, and I talked to Dee Dee Bridgewater about this, is that the song really has a life of its own, and you can make it yours, and it can make or break you. And I want to know how hard it was for you to make sure that Betty, because she had many songs in her cadre, of ballads, and also the stuff that she swung with. How did you come in the fold into help her make it hers?
Okay, well, I mean, it was hers when I entered the whole arena of her music, of course. And what I noticed in preparation, when Betty invited me to audition for her band, and I went and bought all the Betty Carter records I could find, I noticed a particular musical axis between her and the pianist John Hicks. Yes. And so, and I already was digging John here in New York, getting to hear him in person. But I noticed this thing they had between them, and so I played along with the records, kind of trying to imitate the way John was playing. And in my first rehearsal, Betty said, I can tell you like John. She says, and I love John. I loved having him in the band. But she said, I want you to give me you. I want you to give me Benny. And I was 19. I didn't know what that was. I just turned 20, actually. I didn't know what that was. She said, give me Benny. That really did feel like a big question mark. Like, what record is that on, But that's how she pushed you. That's how it started, And she was really like a Jedi at sort of peeping what your strengths and weaknesses were, what your pet phrases, musical phrases, licks were, and she would challenge you not to repeat yourself. Right in front of the audience, she'd be, you played that last night, what else you got? And you would, it was demoralized. You wouldn't want her to do that to you, and she'd make you like think of the moment. Even after 4 years I'd been in the band, at which time I joined Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, I still felt like the specter of Betty looking over my shoulder saying, what you got for me tonight? Which is great, incredible training. You can't get that in school.
Cyrus Chestnut played with her.
Yes, indeed.
And he told me the very same thing. They said she could be brutal when you hit that band stage.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, she really took the institution of her band, of hiring 3 young gentlemen, very seriously, that it was training for us. She used to say to the audience, this is on-the-job training. We hated her saying it, but it was. We played every tempo, every key. Again, as we were speaking of earlier, learning about consistency in performance. When you're tired, you had an argument with your girlfriend on the phone, it's time to go on stage, you got to bring it. It's not about you, And just learning that on the road with her. And just really challenging me on so many levels about listening to the records, what's imitation and what's emulation. And it was different for her generationally. She was around those cats, Bird and Miles. But for us, they exist through recordings. And so, as I said, that's my canon. They're records, I mean, any of the Miles Davis albums, any of the acoustic records he made, with the rhythm sections, say Horace Silver, Percy Heath, Kenny Clark, or Red Garland, Paul Chambers, Philly Joe Jones, or Wynton Kelly, or Bill Evans on piano with Paul Chambers and Jimmy Cobb, or one of the arguably ultimate rhythm sections in the history of the music, Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, and Tony Williams.
That's it.
Hello.
That's it.
Yeah. So any of those records they made, I just feel is gold for any of us serious, a serious scholar of the music. A serious scholar is always learning, always seeking to learn, if you're serious about it.
Speaking of scholar, you are a professor of music at the University of Michigan, and you're there with 2 beautiful people I love, Mr. Bob and Jill Hurst. And I got to ask you, moving forward, but what are some of the things that you and Bob are really trying to put on this next generation of musicians and jazz musicians in general?
Well, the thing is, no one gets to all the music. No one can learn all the music or play all the music. So you want to treat whatever music you are going to play with respect. And as we were speaking of earlier, respect for the fact that you're going to be giving it to the listener. So if we're learning classic repertoire, say through a recording, from something from a record, then really not just treating it superficially. When I listen to a record that I've savored over and over for decades, a classic record, I now listen with the assumption that there's some nuance I'm missing. I listen like that. And the things I hear, you know, because if you assume you know it and kind of just sing along, you can do it, and you're missing, there's gold in there on those records. There's a reason they feel so special, and it's much deeper than just a few things that we could list, you know? And just noticing the interaction, you notice things more and more over the years, listening to the same classic recordings. So I forgot what your question was, by the way.
Yeah, just the teaching. What are you imparting that to?
So Professor Hurst and I, what we share in common. So we both really share a united voice at the university with the students, that we do learn, as all the masters did, from the music that came before us. You know, whatever kind of mission statement we have as an adolescent person about where we're going to be taking the music, you have to have a music to take in the first place. You know, Jackie McLean, I was honored to have breakfast with Jackie McLean once, and he said to me, now Benny, he says, when you deal with the concept, and this really is true, he moved in, he said, and there is such a thing as the concept. And he elaborated from there, but he was being real with me about the music, you know, the Charlie Parker language. Yeah.
Paint a picture. 1983, you move into New York City. And you had really a good 12, 13 years here in New York City, you know, in between traveling. And New York was very different. A lot of musicians that came in the Young Lion scene said that New York at that time was really kind of the last hurrah of the great era of the great jazz clubs and just the music scene. What are some of your reflections now looking back at that?
Okay, so I want to say, moved here in '82. Was born in New York, but born in grew up in California. So moved here in '82, and I was here about 23 years, all told. So at the time, I could find Walter Bishop Jr., who became my New York father and my first piano teacher here, was someone who wasn't coming to the San Francisco Bay Area where I grew up, but I knew him through records with Jackie McLean, Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, and that's what I wanted to get. He wasn't the most famous person, but I wanted to get the authentic thing. He comped, My Little Suede Shoes with Charlie Parker. That's him playing piano. I wanted to learn those voicings, those bebop piano voicings. I wanted to ask him about Bud Powell, and he really took me under his wing. And these people, they were there. It was like movie stars, people that were on these records, these great records, music we now call bebop and hard bop. Dexter Gordon, Art Blakey were walking around. They'd be walking around in the Village. Milt Jackson. And it wasn't, you didn't take it for granted. It was incredible to get to be around them.
Recording with them, too, had to be intense, too.
Yes, well, some people like Art Blakey and Ray Brown and Oscar Peterson especially had this recording ethic that basically the leader got to dictate, you might just do one take. If the leader really had a reason they wanted to do two, okay. But you don't get to say anything about it, and be prepared to nail it in the first take. So you got to have your stuff together, right? All that entails. Be prepared for that, because Oscar or Art or Ray, they may say that's the one. Anything you did, that's the way you play. If you didn't like something you did, if you really want to break it down, whatever it was you didn't like or what you didn't like about it, being on a path as a student of music, you want to address that.
Well, I read something too, not to cut you off.
Please.
Oscar hated doing multiple. He hated that.
So we made that record, Oscar and Benny. That was the case. Those were first, or a few of them were second takes, but that was it. You don't do three. I didn't get to say anything about it, but it was just so surreal to be there in that situation. Really, surreal to be playing with Oscar, just to actually just get to listen and watch him, let alone be playing along. But yeah, the way they play, the consistency that Oscar and Ray both learned being on those Jazz at the Philharmonic tours, where they accompanied Coleman Hawkins and Ben Webster, Roy Eldridge, and these folks. You didn't miss. With this concept, you're always swinging. You're always nailing the change. You're always playing good notes. You always got a good sound. They're on that level. These guys are gladiators. Yeah, they were hungry.
And then they were doing those one-nighters, and they were on the road, constantly on the road, too.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So it's important for us to realize today, young people, that that's another element that's at the core of the music. Actually, African-American jazz is actually really reaching, not just kind of phoning it in, but the people developed this music to such a profound level that it touched the whole world. So that's not just playing kind of okay. That's like playing your heart out, and that's at this core of this music. I feel that from all the masters, But I feel it on the records that they're really hungry. And in fact, I can say more firsthand that I saw it in the masters that I got to work with. My mentors like Art Blakey and Ray Brown and Oscar Peterson. They were still humble to their masters. And Ray Brown, who I had my longest tenure as a sideman with him, 4.5 years. We were on the road constantly. He was a workaholic, which was great. I never saw him on the most hectic travel day, little sleep, 3 flights, didn't get to eat right, didn't get to take that final shower before he went on stage, whatever it was. Never saw him take the bass out of the case and just he was always like transformed, like a teenager again, hungry, ready to play, I swear, every night. So being around that, that puts something on your mind about what the music is beyond the superficial stylistic elements, the spirit and some kind of heritage of the music, I'd like to say.
this is the last question and the hardest that I ask all musicians. Benny Green, what does jazz music mean to you?
Well, jazz is my life. It's the music that my father introduced me to. The very first thing he told me about jazz, which is my foundation, is not a racial thing, but it's a cultural thing. He said, Benny, if you like these records that we've been listening to, which at the time were Thelonious Monk and Charlie Parker and Ray Charles, he said, you should understand that this is black music. And he said, that doesn't mean that everyone can enjoy it and even play it, but first of all, you need to understand where the music comes from. I now understand it didn't specifically mean that it's the color of your skin, but he was talking about coming from the blues, I believe. You know, that's what all the masters I spoke to about, who I was privileged to be around, did emphasize to me. That is absolutely the foundation of jazz, is the blues. Blues and swinging. So that's the trunk, and then all those other elements we talked about, taking chances, sense of humor, tasteful, balanced show of bravura, thoughtful quotation of other thematic material, and all these things going on. The more I talk about it, the stupider I sound. And this is why, as someone who's so privileged to be called a professor, you know, what I profess to be a bridge to the music. I'm not the source. We know the source is there on these records. And so I know whatever swinging is, you know, whatever the jazz truly is, students need to listen to records to get what it is, not have me break it down into words and say, well, Professor Green or Professor Hurst said it's this. But if they listen to the records, we'll see whatever it is deeper than certainly someone like myself could sum up, you know, in 1,000 words. And that's the magic of it that keeps us striving. So I'm grateful to the masters of the music for creating it in such a way that we'll constantly be reaching just to even answer to the profound, you know, depths that they've already established, you know, of emotional expression in the music.
That'll do it again for another edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace, reporting from Birdland here in New York City. I'd like to personally thank the talented Benny Green for his time. Make sure you go out and support his latest new CD, Live at Santa Cruz, which is on the Sunnyside Records imprint. I'd like to personally thank the staff and management here at Birdland for their warm hospitality. As always, please visit my website, www.thepacereport.com, for my weekly column as well as my past segments. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Till next time, peace.